Hey there, how's it going? Thanks for joining me today. Whether you're relaxing at home on your commute or winding down for the evening, I'm really glad you're here. Picture this. It's October 3rd, 2019, and somewhere in the Crimean Peninsula, astronomer Gennady Borisov is doing what he's done thousands of times before. He's scanning the night sky through his telescope, methodically cataloguing the faint smudges and moving dots that populate the cosmic darkness. But tonight, something catches his eye. A small, unremarkable blur that shouldn't be there. Before we continue this journey, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extraordinary for you. Now, here's what makes this moment so incredible. Borisov has no idea he's just spotted humanity's second interstellar visitor. Think about that for a second. In all of recorded history, we've only confirmed two objects from beyond our solar system passing through our cosmic neighborhood. The first was Oumuamua in 2017, that strange, cigar-shaped rock that tumbled through our system and left scientists scratching their heads. But this new visitor, this faint smudge that Borisov is carefully noting in his observation log, this one is about to change everything we think we know about the universe. Within just a few days, the calculations start rolling in from observatories around the world. The trajectory is unmistakable. This object, which they'll soon name 2I, Borisov, the 2I standing for second interstellar, is definitely not from our solar system. It's moving at 42 kilometers per second, far too fast to be bound by our sun's gravity. This visitor has traveled unimaginable distances through the void between stars, carrying with it secrets from whatever solar system gave it birth. But here's where the story gets wild. As more telescopes turn toward this cosmic wanderer, something becomes clear. This isn't just any interstellar object. This is a comet. And not just any comet, but one that's about to reveal an impossible secret that will literally change the face of our sun forever. You see, comets are supposed to be simple things. Dirty snowballs, we call them. Ice mixed with dust and rock, left over from the formation of their parent solar system. When they get close to a star, the ice sublimates, turns directly from solid to gas, creating those beautiful tails we see stretching across the sky. It's a process we understand completely. We've watched thousands of comets do exactly this dance around our sun for centuries. But 2I, Borisov, is different. Deep within its seemingly ordinary icy exterior lies something that shouldn't exist. A core of ultra-dense matter that makes lead feel like cotton candy. We're talking about material so compressed that a teaspoon of it would weigh 10 million tons. This is matter that can only form in the most violent events in the universe, when massive stars explode in supernovas, or when neutron stars collide with the force of 1 billion nuclear bombs. Now, I know what you're thinking. How is that even possible? How could a fragment of a neutron star end up wrapped in ordinary ice masquerading as a simple comet? Well, let me paint you a picture of cosmic violence that would make any horror movie seem tame. Somewhere in the galaxy, perhaps hundreds of millions of years ago, two neutron stars, each one a city-sized sphere containing more mass than our entire sun, began their final death spiral. These objects are already beyond our comprehension. A neutron star is so dense that a single sugar cube of its material would weigh as much as Mount Everest. When two of them collide, they don't just explode. They tear apart the very fabric of space and time. In that collision, exotic particles that shouldn't be able to exist under normal circumstances get quantum-locked into crystalline structures. Think of it as nature's most extreme pressure cooker, creating materials that exist nowhere else in the universe. Most of these exotic fragments get scattered to the cosmic winds, but some, just some, get ejected intact, wrapped in the debris of whatever planets or comets were unlucky enough to be nearby. This is 2I, Borisov's origin story. a fragment of stellar death, wrapped in ice, tumbling through the galaxy for eons until it wandered into our solar system, and we had absolutely no idea what was coming our way. As the weeks pass after Borisov's discovery, astronomers around the world are having a field day. Finally, an interstellar comet they can study properly. Unlike Oumuamua, which zipped through our system so fast we barely got a good look at it, 2I, Borisov is going to stick around for months. Its trajectory brings it close enough to our Sun for detailed observation, but not so close that it immediately vaporizes. The Parker Solar Probe, IS, that incredible piece of engineering humanity sent closer to the Sun than any previous spacecraft, starts picking up some strange readings as the comet approaches. The probe's magnetometers, designed to measure the Sun's magnetic field with exquisite precision, begin detecting fluctuations that make no sense. The readings are subtle at first, just tiny variations that could easily be dismissed as instrument noise, but they're persistent and they're growing stronger. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the lead magnetometer specialist at Johns Hopkins, stares at her screens in confusion. She's been studying solar magnetic fields for 15 years, and she's never seen anything like this. The fluctuations aren't random. They have a pattern, almost like a heartbeat pulsing in rhythm with something she can't identify. When she plots the timing of these magnetic anomalies against the comet's position, a chill runs down her spine. The closer 2I, Borisov, gets to the Sun, the stronger the fluctuations become. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers around the world are having their own moment of confusion. They're watching 2I, Borisov, through their backyard telescopes, tracking its progress as it falls toward the Sunday. But something's wrong with their brightness calculations. The comet should be gradually getting brighter as it approaches our star, and its ice begins to sublime, but it's brightening far faster than any model predicts. Marcus Torres, a retired engineer in Albuquerque who's been photographing comets for 30 years, notices it first. He's been taking nightly photos of 2I, Borisov, since November, carefully measuring its brightness and comparing it to established formulas. By early December, his measurements are off by a factor of 3. The comet is simply too bright, too active, for the amount of solar radiation it should be receiving at its current distance. He posts his findings on the astronomy forums, expecting someone to point out his error. Instead, reports start flooding in from observers around the globe. Everyone is seeing the same thing. This comet isn't behaving like any comet should. The scientific community is baffled. Comets can be unpredictable, meine. Some are more volatile than others. Some have unusual compositions that make them brighter or dimmer than expected. But 2I, Borisov's behavior is off the charts. It's as if there's an additional energy source somewhere inside the comet, something driving activity levels that solar heating alone can't explain. Deep space tracking stations start picking up another anomaly. The comet's trajectory is changing in tiny but measurable ways. Not the kind of changes you'd expect from outgassing as ice turns to vapor, not those are well understood and easy to calculate. These changes are different, as if the comet is experiencing forces that shouldn't exist. At the European Space Agency's tracking center in Germany, orbital mechanics specialist Dr. Elena Vasquez runs the numbers again and again. The trajectory changes are small, just a few meters per day, but they're consistent and they're accelerating. It's almost as if the comet is creating its own gravitational anomalies, bending space around itself in ways that violate everything we know about physics. By late December, as 2I, Borisov approaches perihelion, Four Lemeri. Its closest approach to the Sun, a scientific community, is in full alert mode. This isn't just an interstellar comet anymore. This is something unprecedented, something that's challenging our fundamental understanding of how matter behaves in the universe. The first real warning comes on December 27th. The Parker Solar Probe, now tracking the comet's approach with every instrument it has, suddenly registers magnetic field fluctuations that spike off the charts. In the space of 6 hours, the Sun's magnetic field strength in the comet's vicinity increases by 400%. Not gradually, not in the smooth patterns scientists have observed during normal solar activity, but in sharp, violent pulses that seem to originate from the comet itself. Ground-based observatories confirm what the Parker probe is detecting. 2I, Borisov isn't just reflecting solar radiation anymore. It's generating its own electromagnetic emissions across the entire spectrum. Radio telescopes pick up signals that pulse in complex patterns. X-ray observatories detect energy bursts that rival the output of small stars. And through it all, the comet continues to brighten, continues to accelerate its impossible behavior as it plunges toward its date with our Sunday. The night of December 27th, astronomer Chen Wei at the Beijing Observatory makes a discovery that will haunt her for the rest of her life. She's analyzing the spectral data from 2I, Borisov, the breakdown of light that tells us what elements are present in the comet's tail, when she spots something that shouldn't be there. Mixed in with the normal signatures of water vapor and carbon compounds are emission lines that don't match any known element. At first, she thinks it's an instrument error. She recalibrates everything and runs the analysis again. The mystery lines are still there, stronger than before. She checks with colleagues at other observatories. They're seeing the same thing. The comet is emitting radiation from particles that don't exist in any periodic table, displaying the signatures of matter that can only form under conditions of temperature and pressure that exist nowhere in the universe except in the cores of dying stars. As December 28th dawns, 2I, Borisov is just hours away from perihelion. Deep within its icy shell, exotic particles that have slept for millions of years are beginning to stir. The Sun's gravity is crushing the comet's structure, and the crystalline matrices that have held these impossible materials stable are starting to crack. Nobody on Earth knows what's about to happen. Nobody realizes that in less than 24 hours, the collision between an interstellar wanderer and our home star will fundamentally change the nature of the Sun itself. The greatest transformation in our solar system's 4.6 billion year history is about to begin, and humanity is completely unprepared for what's coming. But here's the thing that gives me chills every time I think about this story. We should have seen it coming. All the signs were there. The magnetic anomalies, the impossible brightness, the trajectory changes, the mystery spectral lines. The universe was screaming at us that something extraordinary was about to happen. We just didn't know how to listen. Tomorrow, I'm going to walk you through the impossible physics that made this cosmic catastrophe possible, how a tiny fragment of stellar death managed to fundamentally alter a star that's over 1 million kilometers wide. Because what happened next defied every law of physics we thought we understood, and changed the course of human history forever. Until then, keep looking up. You never know what might be coming our way from the darkness between the stars. Welcome back. I hope you've been thinking about what we discussed yesterday, that mysterious interstellar comet carrying secrets from another star system's violent death. Today, we're diving into the physics that should have been impossible, but somehow rewrote the rules of our universe in the span of a few terrifying hours. Before we jump into the heart of this cosmic collision, let me set the stage with numbers that will blow your mind. Picture our Sun, 1.4 million kilometers wide, containing 99.8% of all the mass in our solar system. It's a fusion reactor so powerful that every second it converts 4 million tons of matter directly into energy. The surface temperature alone is 5,500 degrees Celsius. The core burns at 15 million degrees. This is not something you mess with lightly. Now, picture 2I, Borisov, a comet roughly 30 kilometers across. To put that in perspective, if our Sun were the size of a football stadium, this comet would be smaller than a grain of rice. The mass difference is so extreme that comparing them feels almost ridiculous. It's like saying a mosquito could knock over a freight train. But here's what we didn't understand about physics until December 28th, 2019 JAR. Sometimes it's not about size. Sometimes it's about what you're carrying. Deep within 2I, Borisov's icy heart lay something that changed every equation. Remember those exotic particles I mentioned? The ones quantum-locked in crystalline structures during a hypernova explosion? These weren't just any particles. We're talking about strange quarks, charm quarks, and even more exotic matter that exists for microseconds in our most powerful particle accelerators. But somehow, in the unimaginable violence of a stellar collision, these particles had been frozen into stable configurations that shouldn't exist anywhere in the universe. Dr. Kenji Nakamura at Tokyo University was the first to work out the theoretical framework for what happened next, though he didn't publish his findings until 3 years later. Even then, half the physics community thought he was suffering from some kind of breakdown. The math was sound, but the implications were so staggering that most scientists simply refused to believe them. Here's what Nakamura figured out, NDOI, and what 2I Borisov was about to demonstrate with devastating clarity. When exotic matter that's been stable for millions of years suddenly encounters the extreme conditions near a star, the quantum locks that hold it together don't just break. They shatter in a cascade reaction that releases energy patterns we'd never observed before. Picture a house of cards, but each card is made of compressed nuclear force. When the bottom card gets disturbed, the whole structure doesn't just fall, it explodes with the concentrated power of stellar fusion. That's what was sleeping inside our innocent-looking interstellar visitor. As 2I Borisov plunged through the sun's corona on December 28th, the temperature and pressure finally reached the critical threshold. The exotic matter structures that had survived the journey between stars began to destabilize. But here's the thing that makes this whole event so mind-bending. They didn't destabilize randomly. The quantum entanglement between particles created a coherent cascade, like a zipper being pulled through the heart of our star. The first moment of contact happened at exactly 14 hours, 37 minutes, universal time. The Parker Solar Probe, positioned just outside the corona, registered the moment when everything changed. The magnetometer readings spiked so violently that the instruments actually shut down for 6 seconds to prevent damage. When they came back online, they were detecting magnetic field patterns that had never been observed in nature. What was happening inside? The sun defied every model of stellar physics ever created. The exotic particles weren't just releasing energy, they were catalyzing new types of fusion reactions in the solar plasma. Imagine dropping a grain of salt into a glass of water and having it instantly transform the entire glass into wine. That's the level of impossibility we're dealing with here. The cascade effect spread through the sun's convection zone like wildfire through a dry forest. Each exotic particle that destabilized triggered the destabilization of dozens more, creating a chain reaction that propagated through the stellar medium at nearly the speed of light. Within minutes, perturbations were racing toward the sun's core, carrying with them energy signatures that would fundamentally alter the fusion processes that have powered our star for 4.6 billion years. Dr. Maria Santos at the European Southern Observatory was monitoring solar neutrino detectors when the wave hit. Neutrinos are ghost particles. They pass through matter so easily that billions of them stream through your body every second without you noticing. They're produced in the sun's core during fusion reactions, and they give us a real-time window into what's happening in the stellar furnace. At 14 hours, 54 minutes universal time, Santos watched her neutrino counts jump by 3,000% in the span of 30 seconds. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was that the neutrino signatures were wrong. Mixed in with the familiar patterns from hydrogen fusion were completely new signatures, evidence of nuclear reactions that shouldn't be possible at the sun's core temperature and pressure. The exotic quarks cascading through the convection zone were creating temporary pockets of ultra-dense matter that enabled fusion pathways requiring 10 times the normal energy threshold. For brief moments, the Sun's core was replicating conditions that normally exist only in the hearts of fly, neutron stars. It was as if someone had temporarily installed a hypernova engine inside our gentle, stable star. 17 hours after initial contact, the perturbations reached the very center of the Sunday. For the first time in its existence, our star's fusion core experienced what physicists would later call a temporal hiccup, a moment when the fundamental rhythm of stellar burning stuttered and changed. The change was subtle at first, detectable only by the most sensitive instruments. The Sun's energy output fluctuated by less than 0.1%, but that tiny change represented more energy than humanity consumes in 1,000,000 years, and it was just the beginning. The exotic matter cascade had created something unprecedented in stellar physics, Ono 5, a thread of ultra-dense plasma running from the corona to the core, a channel where normal physics didn't apply. Along this thread, energy was flowing in ways that violated conservation laws, creating feedback loops that amplified the very perturbations that formed them. Think of it like this. Imagine a guitar string that, when plucked, somehow creates more energy than you put into plucking it. That's essentially what was happening inside our Sunday. The exotic matter wasn't just releasing its stored energy, it was catalyzing the release of energy from the stellar medium itself, creating a runaway reaction that fed on its own output. Dr. Rajesh Patel at the Indian Space Research Organisation was tracking solar wind measurements when the first major wave erupted from the Sun's surface. The solar wind, IIS, that constant stream of charged particles flowing out from our star, IIS, suddenly increased in velocity by 40%. But velocity wasn't the only thing that changed. The particle composition shifted dramatically, with isotopes appearing that shouldn't exist outside of supernova explosions. The magnetic field lines threading through the solar corona began reorganizing themselves in impossible configurations. Instead of the relatively smooth, predictable patterns that had characterized solar magnetic fields for billions of years, chaotic vortices began forming, magnetic tornadoes that trapped and accelerated particles to nearly relativistic speeds. By the evening of December 28th, every solar observatory on Earth was in crisis mode. The Sun was displaying behavior that contradicted fundamental assumptions about stellar physics. The photosphere, the visible surface of the Sun, TE, developed a persistent bright patch exactly where 2I, Borisov, had passed through the corona. This patch pulsed with a 17-minute cycle, as if the Sun had developed a new heartbeat. The spectroscopic analysis of this bright patch revealed emissions that broke the periodic table. Elements were appearing in the solar spectrum that couldn't exist under normal stellar conditions, isotopes so unstable they should decay in microseconds, but somehow remaining coherent in the intense magnetic fields generated by the exotic matter cascade. Professor Lisa Chen at Stanford spent that night running calculations that she hoped would prove her observations wrong. The energy signatures coming from the Sun suggested that localized regions of the stellar medium had temporarily achieved densities approaching those found in neutron star cores. This should have been absolutely impossible. The Sun simply doesn't have enough mass to create such conditions under any normal circumstances. But the exotic matter from 2I, Borisov had created decidedly abnormal circumstances. The quantum-locked particles were acting like seeds of ultra-density, creating gravitational microwells that compressed the surrounding plasma beyond what stellar physics said was possible. These pockets of compressed matter lasted only seconds before dispersing, but while they existed, they generated magnetic fields powerful enough to bend space-time itself. The most disturbing discovery came from gravitational wave detectors. LIGO and Virgo, designed to detect ripples in space-time from distant cosmic events, began picking up signals from our own solar system. The sun was generating gravitational waves, something that should only happen during the most violent events in the universe, like black hole mergers or supernova explosions. The waves were weak compared to typical LIGO detections, but their very existence meant that the sun's mass distribution was fluctuating in ways that warped the fabric of space-time. The exotic matter cascade wasn't just changing the sun's energy output, it was literally reshaping our star's relationship with the geometry of the universe. As the hours passed, it became clear that what had started as a simple comet impact had triggered a fundamental transformation. The sun wasn't just experiencing a temporary disruption, NTP. It was evolving into something new, something that had never existed before in the observable universe. The exotic particles had introduced new physics into the stellar medium, creating self-sustaining reactions that would continue long after the original catalyst had been consumed. Our star was becoming a hybrid entity, part normal main sequence star, part neutron star core, operating under physical laws that existed nowhere else in the cosmos. By midnight universal time on December 29th, the transformation was accelerating. The bright patch on the photosphere had expanded to cover nearly 5% of the sun's visible surface. The 17-minute pulse cycle was becoming stronger and more regular, as if the sun was learning to synchronize its new physics with its ancient rhythms. Radio telescopes around the world detected structured emissions from the transformed regions, not the random noise of plasma turbulence, but organized patterns that suggested the exotic matter was creating some kind of information processing within the stellar medium itself. The sun was developing something that looked disturbingly like consciousness. Tomorrow, I'll walk you through the 7 days that followed, when our transformed star unleashed its fury on the solar system and changed the course of human civilization forever. Because what happened next wasn't just a scientific curiosity, it was an extinction-level event that would test every assumption we'd ever made about our place in the universe. Until then, remember, the universe is far stranger and more dangerous than we ever imagined, and sometimes the smallest visitor can change everything. Good morning, and welcome back to our journey through humanity's most terrifying week. If you've been following along, you know that by December 29th, 2019, our sun had fundamentally transformed into something that shouldn't exist, a hybrid star operating under physics that were rewriting themselves in real time. Today, we're going to live through the 7 days that followed, when our familiar, life-giving star became something alien and hostile. I need to warn you, what I'm about to describe isn't easy to hear. These 7 days represent the closest humanity has ever come to complete extinction, and the scars of this week are still visible in our world today. But it's a story that needs to be told, because it's the story of how we learned that the universe doesn't owe us anything, and how we discovered strength we never knew we had. Day 1, December 29th, 2019. Dr. Sarah Martinez is having her morning coffee in Mexico City when she steps onto her balcony and sees something that makes her drop her mug. The northern sky is ablaze with green and purple light, aurora borealis dancing across the heavens at a latitude where they should never appear. She's a meteorologist, not an astronomer, but she knows enough to realize that what she's seeing is impossible. Aurora only occur when charged particles from the solar wind interact with Earth's magnetic field at the poles. Mexico City is 2,500 kilometers south of where any aurora should be visible. For the lights to appear here, the solar wind would have to be so intense that it's overwhelming Earth's magnetic field across the entire hemisphere. Within minutes, her phone is buzzing with alerts. The National Weather Service is issuing radiation warnings. Satellite operators are reporting failures across multiple orbital platforms. The International Space Station executes an emergency protocol, moving its crew into the heavily shielded service module as radiation levels spike to 500% above normal. At NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, the morning shift arrives to find their computers displaying readings that should be impossible. The solar wind velocity has increased to 900 kilometers per second, BUC, more than double the normal maximum. But velocity isn't the only problem. The particle density is off the charts, and the magnetic field strength is fluctuating in patterns that look almost artificial. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the center's director, stares at the data feeds coming in from solar monitoring satellites. In 30 years of studying space weather, she's never seen anything remotely like this. The sun is behaving as if it's having some kind of stellar tantrum, throwing charged particles into space with unprecedented violence. But the particles themselves are wrong. Mixed in with the normal protons and electrons are isotopes that shouldn't exist, heavy elements that could only be created in the cores of dying stars. It's as if the sun is somehow accessing nuclear processes that require temperatures and pressures far beyond what our star should be capable of producing. The first real disaster strikes at 11:37 a.m. Eastern Time. A massive solar particle event overwhelms the magnetosphere of a commercial satellite constellation, frying the electronics of 43 communication satellites in less than 10 minutes. Phone. Networks across North America begin experiencing outages as ground stations lose contact with their orbital relays. By afternoon, the aurora have spread south of the Mexican border. Amateur photographers in Guatemala are posting images on social media. ADA. The last posts many of them will make for weeks. The electromagnetic interference from the solar storm is creating havoc with electronic systems worldwide. GPS satellites drift out of position as their atomic clocks are disrupted by radiation. Air traffic control systems begin failing as navigation becomes unreliable. The day ends with a discovery that chills every solar physicist on the planet. The Hinode Solar Observatory captures images of the sun's photosphere that reveal the transformed region has grown. The bright patch where 2I, Borisov, passed through the corona now covers nearly 10% of the sun's visible surface, and it's pulsing with increasing intensity. Day 2, December 30th. The morning brings worse news. The transformed region of the sun has developed what can only be described as structure. Instead of the chaotic, turbulent surface that characterizes normal solar phenomena, the bright patch displays organized patterns that pulse in synchronized waves. The 17-minute cycle has evolved into something more complex, a rhythm that suggests the exotic matter has created some kind of information processing network within the stellar plasma. Dr. Yuki Tanaka at the Japanese Solar Observatory makes a discovery that she initially refuses to report. The electromagnetic emissions from the transformed region aren't random. They're modulated in ways that look disturbingly like communication protocols. The sun appears to be sending structured signals into space, patterns of radiation that vary in frequency and amplitude with mathematical precision. The realization hits the scientific community like a cold shower. The exotic matter hasn't just changed the sun's physics. It's created something that might be attempting to communicate, or worse, to coordinate with something else in the cosmos. But there's no time to ponder the philosophical implications, because the sun is about to demonstrate just how dangerous its transformation has become. At 2:15 p.m. Universal Time, radio communications fail globally for exactly 3 hours. Not gradually, not in scattered outages, but instantly and completely across all frequencies. The silence is deafening. For 3 hours, humanity loses its voice. Ships at sea navigate by compass and stars. Aircraft are grounded as air traffic control falls silent. Emergency services revert to systems that haven't been used since the 1970s. The global economy, built on instantaneous communication, grinds to a halt. When communications return at 5:15 p.m., they bring disturbing news from deep space monitoring stations. The radio blackout coincided with a massive burst of structured emissions from the sun, not the chaotic noise of a stellar flare, but organized signals broadcast across multiple frequencies simultaneously. Whatever consciousness was emerging within our star had just announced its presence to the universe. Day 3, December 31st. New Year's Eve, 2019, becomes the most terrifying night in human history. The sun's transformation accelerates dramatically, with the bright patch expanding to cover nearly 20% of the photosphere. But expansion isn't the only change. The transformed region is beginning to affect the sun's magnetic field in ways that threaten every planet in the solar system. The solar wind velocity doubles again, reaching unprecedented speeds of 1,800 kilometers per second. Mars, with its thin atmosphere and weak magnetic field, takes the full brunt of the stellar fury. In the span of 6 hours, the red planet loses 10% of its remaining atmosphere to space, stripped away by the hurricane of charged particles flowing out from our transformed star. The Martian atmosphere had been slowly leaking into space for billions of years, but what normally takes millennia happens in hours. Rovers on the surface register pressure drops that would be dramatic even by Martian standards. The thin air becomes even thinner, and the already harsh environment becomes utterly uninhabitable. But Mars is just the beginning. Earth's magnetosphere, that invisible shield that protects us from solar radiation, begins to buckle under the assault. The magnetic field lines that normally deflect charged particles start to compress, pushed inward by the unprecedented solar wind pressure. Dr. Michael Foster at the University of Alaska's Geophysical Institute watches in horror as the magnetosphere contracts to half its normal size. The auroral oval, normally confined to polar regions, expands toward the equator at a rate of several degrees per hour. By midnight universal time, aurora are visible as far south as Florida and the Mediterranean. The compression of Earth's magnetic field has consequences that go far beyond pretty lights in the sky. Animals that navigate by magnetic fields begin showing signs of severe disorientation. Whales, dolphins, and sea turtles, creatures that have relied on geomagnetic navigation for millions of years, suddenly find themselves lost. The first reports come from marine biologists monitoring humpback whale populations in the Pacific. Entire pods begin swimming in circles, their internal compasses spinning wildly as Earth's magnetic field fluctuates under solar bombardment. Within hours, whales are beaching themselves on every continent that has a coastline. Sea turtle hatchlings, programmed by evolution to follow magnetic field lines to find the ocean, scramble in random directions. Migratory birds fall from the sky as their navigation systems fail completely. Humanity's wildlife is paying the price for our star's transformation. Day 4, January 1st, 2020. The new year begins with a discovery that makes every previous day seem like a gentle warm-up. The sun's gravitational field is fluctuating. Not dramatically. The changes are measured in parts per billion, but they're detectable, and they're growing stronger. Dr. Elena Rodriguez at the European Space Agency's Precision Tracking Center notices it first. The orbits of inner solar system planets are showing tiny but measurable perturbations. Mercury's orbit, closest to the Sun, shifts by several meters. Venus shows smaller but still detectable changes. Even Earth experiences subtle variations in its orbital velocity. The implications are staggering. For gravitational effects to be detectable at planetary distances, the Sun's mass distribution must be undergoing fundamental changes. The exotic matter cascade isn't just affecting the surface layers, it's reaching all the way to the stellar core, altering the very structure of our star. But gravitational anomalies are the least of humanity's problems as Day 4 progresses. The compressed magnetosphere begins to fail entirely in localized regions. For the first time in Earth's history, high-energy solar particles reach the upper atmosphere over populated areas. The assault begins at 0800 hours universal time. Airline crews on polar routes report strange lights and instrument failures as cosmic rays penetrate their aircraft. Within an hour, every airline in the world grounds flights above 60,000 feet as radiation levels spike to dangerous levels. By noon, the effects reach ground level. Radio communication becomes impossible across large portions of the northern hemisphere as ionospheric storms create electromagnetic chaos. Power grids in northern Canada and Scandinavia begin experiencing surges as geomagnetically induced currents overwhelm protective systems. The day ends with a phenomenon that scientists struggle to explain. The northern lights, now visible as far south as Mexico, begin displaying colors that have never been observed in aurora before, deep purples that fade to silver, then flare into brilliant gold. Spectroscopic analysis reveals that these new colors correspond to emission lines from elements that shouldn't exist in Earth's atmosphere. The exotic particles streaming from our transformed sun are carrying impossible isotopes into our magnetosphere, creating aurora displays that showcase elements found nowhere in the periodic table. Our planet's upper atmosphere is becoming a laboratory for physics that exists nowhere else in the universe. Day 5, January 2nd. If the previous days were warning shots, Day 5 is when the Sun declares war on the solar system. At 06:15 Universal Time, the transformed region erupts in what can only be called a mega flare. But this isn't an ordinary solar flare. It's a concentrated burst of energy 50 times more powerful than the Carrington event of 1859, the largest solar storm in recorded history. The flare races outward from the Sun at the speed of light, carrying with it more energy than humanity has consumed in its entire existence. When it strikes Earth's magnetosphere 8 minutes later, the result is catastrophic. Power grids across Europe cascade into failure within minutes. Not the gradual brownouts and rolling blackouts that characterize normal grid stress, but instantaneous, complete shutdown across entire continental regions. Transformer stations explode in showers of sparks as geomagnetically induced currents overwhelm every protective system ever designed. London goes dark at 14:27 local time. Paris follows 3 minutes later. Berlin, Rome, Madrid, one by one, the great cities of Europe disappear from the nighttime glow of civilization. Within an hour, 200 million people are without power, and the backup systems designed to restore electricity are themselves destroyed by the electromagnetic pulse. The flare's effects spread beyond Europe as Earth's rotation carries other regions into the line of fire. Power stations in western Russia fail. The electrical grid serving Moscow dies with a sound like thunder as transformers vaporize under the assault. Emergency generators kick in at hospitals and critical facilities, but many of these secondary systems have also been damaged by the electromagnetic interference. But the power grid failures are just the beginning. The mega flare carries with it charged particles accelerated to nearly 10% of the speed of light, velocities that shouldn't be possible in any normal stellar event. When these particles strike Earth's atmosphere, they create cascades of secondary radiation that penetrate deeper into the biosphere than any natural phenomenon in recorded history. Commercial aircraft still in flight experience instrument failures that force emergency landings. The International Space Station activates its maximum radiation protection protocols as particle detectors register levels that exceed safe exposure limits by orders of magnitude. Astronauts huddle in the most heavily shielded compartments, knowing that their mission may have just become a one-way trip. The flare's radiation penetrates so deeply into the atmosphere that even ground-level locations begin registering significant increases in background radiation. Hospitals in northern Europe report the first cases of acute radiation syndrome in patients who were simply outdoors when the flare struck. Day 6, January 3rd. The morning brings a discovery that fundamentally changes our understanding of what our sun has become. Dr. Priya Patel at the Indian Institute of Astrophysics makes an observation that she initially thinks must be an instrument error. The sun's spectrum has changed. Not just the emissions from the transformed region, but the entire star is now producing light that contains frequencies never before observed in nature. new emission lines appear. Across the electromagnetic spectrum, IF, evidence of nuclear processes that shouldn't be possible under any known stellar conditions. The Sun is creating elements that exist on no periodic table, isotopes so exotic that they challenge our basic understanding of atomic structure. But the spectroscopic anomalies are overshadowed by more immediate concerns. The mega flare from Day 5 was just the beginning. The transformed region of the Sun continues to expand and evolve, now covering nearly half of the photosphere and showing increasingly complex organizational patterns. The 17-minute pulse cycle has evolved into something far more sophisticated. A multi-layered rhythm that suggests the exotic matter has created some kind of distributed processing network across vast regions of the sky. Stellar surface. The Sun is developing capabilities that look less like physics and more like thought. Plants across the northern hemisphere begin exhibiting strange behavior. Despite full daylight, stomata, the tiny pores that plants use for gas exchange, begin closing in response to the altered solar spectrum. Photosynthesis rates drop dramatically as vegetation struggles to process light that contains wavelengths no plant has ever evolved to handle. Agricultural regions that feed billions of people watch their crops begin to wither under a sun that no longer provides the familiar light that has nurtured life on Earth for billions of years. The transformation isn't just threatening human technology, it's attacking the very foundation of the biosphere. Marine ecosystems show the first signs of collapse as phytoplankton, ESA, the microscopic organisms that form the base of ocean food chains, fail to adapt to the altered solar radiation. Ocean monitoring stations report massive die-offs of marine microorganisms, setting the stage for cascading ecological disasters that will take decades to fully understand. Day 7, January 4th. The final day of our week of terror brings discoveries that will haunt humanity for generations. Dr. Lisa Chen at the Stanford Linear Accelerator makes a measurement that she initially refuses to believe. Gravitational wave detectors are picking up signals from the Sun that indicate our star is somehow manipulating the fabric of space-time itself. The waves are subtle but unmistakable, ripples in the geometry of the universe that correspond exactly to the pulse rhythms emanating from the transformed stellar regions. The exotic matter hasn't just changed the Sun's nuclear physics. It's given our star the ability to warp space and time in ways that should only be possible around black holes or neutron stars. The gravitational anomalies have practical consequences that extend far beyond theoretical physics. GPS satellites, already struggling with radiation damage, begin experiencing timing errors that make navigation impossible. The atomic clocks that provide precise time references are being affected by gravitational time dilation effects that vary with the Sun's pulse cycles. But the most terrifying discovery comes from deep space monitoring stations. The structured emissions from the Sun aren't just random signals, they're responses. Radio telescopes detect answering signals from multiple locations across the galaxy, evidence that whatever intelligence has awakened within our star is communicating with similar entities in other solar systems. Humanity realizes with mounting horror that the transformation of our Sun isn't an isolated event. The exotic matter from 2I, Borisov, has connected our star to a network of transformed stellar entities scattered across the galaxy. We're no longer alone in the universe, but the company we've joined is not benevolent. The day ends with a final, crushing blow to human civilization. The Sun's spectrum shifts so dramatically that the familiar yellow light that has illuminated our world for billions of years disappears entirely. Our star now blazes with white-blue, radiance so intense that direct observation causes immediate retinal damage. Outdoor exposure to the new solar radiation becomes impossible for unprotected humans. Skin begins to blister within minutes of direct sunlight. The ozone layer, bombarded by unprecedented ultraviolet flux, thins by 60% in a matter of hours. By sunset on January 4th, humanity faces a stark reality. The sun that gave us life has become our enemy. The transformation that began with a tiny comet from interstellar space has fundamentally altered the most important star in our universe. Tomorrow, I'll take you through those first desperate months when humanity realized that everything had changed forever, and we had to reinvent civilization itself just to survive under our hostile new star. The universe had taught us a lesson we'll never forget. Nothing lasts forever, and even the most fundamental assumptions about reality can change in the blink of an eye. Welcome back to the most difficult chapter of our story. Today, we're going to experience what it was like to live through those first horrifying months when humanity discovered that our planet was no longer habitable under the light of our transformed Sunday. This is the story of how 8 billion people suddenly became refugees on their own world. January 4th, 2020, 6:37 a.m. Beijing time. Sarah Chen had always loved watching the sunrise from her apartment on the 23rd floor. For 34 years, she'd started most mornings with coffee and the gentle glow of dawn breaking over the city. But as she opens her curtains this morning, something is terribly wrong. The sun blazes white-blue, so brilliant that she can't look directly at it even through her window. The light streaming into her apartment feels different, harsh, alien, carrying an intensity that makes her skin tingle with discomfort. Within minutes of exposure to the direct sunlight filtering through her glass, she notices redness developing on her exposed arms. Sarah doesn't yet know that she's witnessing the first sunrise of humanity's new reality. She doesn't understand that the familiar yellow star that has warmed our planet for 4.6 billion years no longer exists. What hangs in the sky now is something else entirely, a hybrid entity operating under physics that make it fundamentally hostile to life as we know it. Across the globe, similar scenes are playing out as people encounter their first direct experience with the transformed Sunday. In Tokyo, morning commuters step out of subway stations and immediately shield their eyes from light so intense it feels like staring into a welding torch. In Mumbai, street vendors who have spent decades working outdoors flee for shelter within minutes as their skin begins to burn. Dr. Maria Santos at the European Southern Observatory is among the first to quantify what humanity is facing. Working through the night as the transformed sun rises over Chile, she measures radiation levels that make her question her own instruments. The ultraviolet flux is 5 times higher than normal. X-ray emissions have increased by 3,000%, but it's the presence of entirely new radiation frequencies that truly terrifies her. The sun is now emitting gamma rays at levels normally associated with neutron stars. These high-energy photons, capable of penetrating deep into biological tissue, are streaming toward Earth in unprecedented quantities. The ozone layer, that thin shield of molecules that has protected life on our planet for billions of years, begins to buckle under the assault. By noon Beijing time, Sarah Chen's arms are covered in what looks like severe sunburn, but she's been indoors all morning, exposed only to filtered sunlight through her apartment windows. The radiation streaming from our transformed star is so intense that even indirect exposure through glass is causing cellular damage. Sarah makes a decision that will save her life. She calls in sick to work and stays inside with the curtains drawn. Across the city, millions of other people make the same choice as reports flood social media about people developing severe burns from minimal sun exposure. Those who ignore the warnings and venture outside unprotected discover the horrifying truth about our new reality. 20 minutes. That's how long unprotected human skin can tolerate direct exposure to the transformed sun before radiation poisoning begins. Not the gentle tanning that humans have enjoyed for millennia, but actual radiation syndrome, nausea, DNA damage, and cellular breakdown that can prove fatal within hours. Liu Wei, a construction worker in Shanghai, learns this lesson the hardest way possible. He starts his shift at 7 a.m., dismissing the reports of unusual solar activity as media hysteria. By 8:15 he's experiencing severe nausea, and his exposed skin is blistering. By 10 a.m. he's in the emergency room with symptoms that doctors recognize from textbooks about nuclear accidents. The hospitals are overwhelmed within hours. Emergency rooms across the daylight hemisphere fill with patients suffering from acute radiation syndrome after minimal sun exposure. Medical staff, struggling to understand how sunlight could suddenly become this dangerous, implement protocols designed for nuclear disasters. Dr. Jennifer Walsh at NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center publishes the first official warning at 1400 hours Universal Time. The bulletin is stark and terrifying. Direct exposure to solar radiation now poses immediate health risks. Seek shelter immediately. Avoid all outdoor activities during daylight hours. But warnings can't change the fundamental reality that humanity now faces. The Earth's ozone layer, bombarded by unprecedented ultraviolet and gamma radiation, begins to thin at a rate that atmospheric scientists thought was impossible. In 3 weeks, 60% of our planet's ozone, the protection simply disappears, vaporized by radiation from our hostile star. The ecological consequences are immediate and catastrophic. Plants across the globe begin to wither as cellular structures break down under the alien radiation. Wheat fields in Kansas turn brown within days. Corn crops in Iowa develop lesions that look disturbingly like radiation burns. Rice paddies in Southeast Asia fail completely as the delicate biochemistry of photosynthesis collapses under the transformed solar spectrum. Dr. Rachel Kim at the University of California, Davis, studies the agricultural devastation with growing horror. The problem isn't just the intensity of the radiation, NUA, it's the presence of entirely new frequencies that no plant has ever evolved to handle. Chlorophyll, the molecule that has captured solar energy for billions of years, literally breaks apart when exposed to the exotic wavelengths streaming from our transformed star. It's as if someone replaced our nurturing sun with a stellar blowtorch, Dr. Kim writes in her emergency report to the Department of Agriculture. Every plant on Earth is suddenly trying to photosynthesize under conditions that exist nowhere else in the known universe. The ocean ecosystems collapse even faster than terrestrial agriculture. Phytoplankton, 9, those microscopic organisms that form the foundation of marine food webs and produce most of Earth's oxygen, begin dying in massive numbers. Ocean monitoring stations report the largest marine die-off in geological history as the base of the food chain simply vanishes. Dr. Carlos Mendoza, a marine biologist stationed in the Galapagos, watches helplessly as the waters around Darwin's famous islands turn murky with dead microorganisms. The crystal-clear seas that have teemed with life for millions of years become aquatic graveyards as species after species succumbs to radiation that penetrates deep into the ocean. The death of phytoplankton creates a feedback loop of environmental destruction. Without these microscopic plants to absorb carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, atmospheric chemistry begins to shift. Carbon dioxide levels start rising at unprecedented rates, while oxygen concentrations begin what will become a slow but steady decline. But the transformation affects more than just the biosphere. Ocean temperatures spike as the transformed sun dumps energy into Earth's climate system at rates that overwhelm every natural cooling mechanism. Sea surface temperatures rise by 3 degrees Celsius in the first month alone, a change that would normally take decades or centuries. The thermal shock waves through ocean currents that have remained stable for millennia. The Gulf Stream, that massive river of warm water that moderates climate across the North Atlantic, begins to weaken and shift. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current, which regulates global ocean circulation, shows signs of instability that threaten to disrupt weather patterns worldwide. In Stockholm, Dr. Erik Larson watches the aurora borealis blaze across the sky at noon. The lights that once appeared only in polar darkness now burn continuously overhead, driven by the constant stream of exotic particles flowing from our transformed star. But these aren't the gentle green curtains that have danced across northern skies for millennia. These aurora glow with colors that have no names, casting shadows at midday with their alien brilliance. The electromagnetic effects of the constant particle bombardment make modern civilization increasingly impossible. GPS satellites fail one by one as their electronics are fried by radiation. Power grids, already damaged by the megaflare, struggle to operate under constant electromagnetic interference. Radio communication becomes unreliable as the ionosphere churns with chaotic electrical activity. Cities begin to empty as the reality of the situation becomes undeniable. London, Paris, New York, the great urban centers that have defined human civilization for centuries, watch their populations flee underground or to heavily shielded buildings. The surface of our planet, bathed in hostile radiation, becomes uninhabitable for extended periods. Sarah Chen makes the decision that millions of others are making simultaneously. She abandons her apartment and moves into the Beijing subway system. The underground tunnels, designed to transport people, become emergency shelters for a population that can no longer safely live above ground. The subway platforms fill with families carrying whatever possessions they could grab before fleeing the surface. Children cry as parents try to explain why they can't go outside anymore. Elderly residents, many of whom remember the hardships of war, recognize the look of permanent displacement in their neighbors' eyes. But it's not just humans who are seeking shelter. Animals across the globe display behaviors that suggest they understand the danger from above. Nocturnal species emerge during daylight hours, seeking any available shade. Diurnal animals retreat to caves, burrows, and any shelter they can find. Zoo animals refuse to leave their indoor enclosures, as if they instinctively understand that the sky has become their enemy. Dr. Sarah Mitchell at the London Zoo documents behavior changes that would be fascinating under normal circumstances, but are terrifying in context. Lions pace nervously in their shelters, refusing to venture into areas exposed to direct sunlight. Birds stop singing during daylight hours. Even insects alter their behavior, with species that have been active during the day for millions of years suddenly becoming strictly nocturnal. The transformation reaches beyond biology into the realm of pure physics. The northern lights, now visible as far south as Mexico, begin displaying phenomena that violate every known law of atmospheric physics. Aurora formations develop geometric patterns that suggest some kind of organizing intelligence. The lights pulse in mathematical sequences that researchers struggle to decode. Dr. Yuki Tanaka at the Japanese Solar Observatory makes a discovery that she keeps classified for months before daring to report it. The aurora patterns aren't random. They're forming symbols, geometric shapes that repeat across different locations and times. Whatever intelligence has awakened within our star is using Earth's own atmosphere as a canvas for messages that humanity lacks the knowledge to interpret. The psychological impact on the global population is devastating. Humans have lived in partnership with the sun for our entire evolutionary history. Our circadian rhythms, our agriculture, our very sense of time and season, everything that defines human existence, is tied to the benevolent star that has nurtured life on Earth for billions of years. Suddenly, that partnership is not just broken, it's reversed. The sun has become humanity's enemy, a source of death rather than life. The psychological trauma of this reversal creates a mental health crisis that overwhelms every support system on the planet. Suicide rates spike as people struggle to cope with a reality where the most fundamental constant in human experience has turned hostile. Depression becomes endemic as populations are forced underground, cut off from natural light and the open sky that has always represented freedom and possibility. Religious communities grapple with theological questions that have no precedent. If God created the sun to give life, what does it mean when that same sun begins dealing death? Some faiths adapt by declaring the transformation a test of human faith and ingenuity. Others fragment as believers struggle to reconcile benevolent theology with hostile reality. In Vatican City, Pope Francis addresses a world facing unprecedented crisis. The light that has guided humanity since the dawn of time has changed, but our spirit remains constant. We must look within ourselves for the light that can guide us through this darkness. But spiritual guidance, however comforting, cannot change the physical reality that humanity faces. The surface of our planet has become uninhabitable during daylight hours. The food chains that sustain complex life are collapsing. The climate systems that have remained stable throughout human history are being overwhelmed by energy from a star that no longer operates according to natural law. By the end of January 2020, the scope of the crisis becomes undeniably clear. This isn't a temporary emergency that will pass with time. The transformation of our sun has created a permanent new reality that will require nothing less than the complete reinvention of human civilization. 8 billion people must learn to live as underground dwellers on a planet where the surface has become hostile to life. Agriculture must be reimagined for a world without safe sunlight. Cities must be rebuilt in tunnels and caverns. The entire structure of human society must adapt to existence under a star that views us not as children to be nurtured, but as obstacles to be eliminated. Tomorrow, I'll take you through humanity's desperate race against extinction, how we mobilized every resource, every brilliant mind, every ounce of human ingenuity to build a new kind of civilization in the depths of our transformed world. Because if there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that humans are the most adaptable species that has ever existed. When the universe changes the rules, we don't surrender. We learn to play a different game entirely. Welcome back to what I consider the most inspiring chapter of our story. Yes, you heard that right, inspiring. Because what you're about to hear is the greatest mobilization of human ingenuity, cooperation, and sheer stubborn determination in our species' history. When faced with extinction, humanity didn't surrender. We got creative. February 15th, 2020. Everything. In a heavily shielded conference room buried 3 levels beneath the United Nations building in New York, representatives from every major nation on Earth gather for the most important meeting in human history. These aren't diplomats engaged in political theatre, MDA. These are engineers, scientists, and crisis managers who understand that they have perhaps months before organized civilization collapses entirely. Dr. Kenji Nakamura from Tokyo University presents the brutal mathematics of human survival. With agriculture failing globally and the surface of the planet uninhabitable during daylight hours, Earth can support maybe 1 billion people for more than 6 months. The other 7 billion face starvation, radiation poisoning, or death from collapsing infrastructure. The numbers are stark, unforgiving, and absolutely unacceptable to everyone in the room. We need miracles, declares Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the European Space Agency. Multiple miracles, delivered simultaneously, or our species won't see Christmas. What happens next represents the fastest international cooperation in recorded history. The Global Solar Crisis Authority forms within 72 hours, not through months of diplomatic negotiation, but through a simple recognition that national boundaries mean nothing when facing extinction. Chinese engineers work alongside American physicists. Russian rocket scientists share data with Indian biotechnologists. Israeli water management experts collaborate with Brazilian agricultural specialists. The traditional competitions and conflicts that have defined international relations for centuries simply evaporate in the face of species-level threat. When the choice is cooperation or death, humanity chooses cooperation with a speed and totality that no one thought possible. The first major initiative launches simultaneously from 3 continents. Project Umbrella represents the most ambitious engineering effort ever undertaken, AGZ. Deployment of 10,000 Mirror satellites to create Earth's first planetary parasol. If humanity can't change the sun, maybe we can change how much of its hostile radiation reaches our planet. At Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral erupts with activity that makes the Apollo program look leisurely. Launch pads that handled maybe a dozen missions per year are now supporting multiple launches daily. SpaceX, NASA, Blue Origin, and every other launch provider on the planet work in unprecedented coordination to lift massive payloads into precise orbital positions. The Mirror satellites aren't elegant. They're enormous sheets of reflective material designed for one purpose: bounce as much solar radiation back into space as possible. Each satellite unfolds to cover an area the size of several football fields, positioned to create overlapping shadows that will hopefully reduce the radiation reaching Earth's surface to survivable levels. Dr. Sarah Kim leads the orbital mechanics team, calculating precisely where each mirror must be positioned. The mathematics are staggering. 10,000 objects must be placed in coordinated orbits that will maintain their protective formation while compensating for solar wind pressure, gravitational perturbations, and the constant bombardment of particles from our transformed star. We're essentially building a roof over the entire planet, she explains to her exhausted team. A roof that has to stay in place while being constantly hammered by forces that would destroy any terrestrial structure in seconds. But Project Umbrella is just one piece of humanity's survival strategy. Deep beneath the surface, the largest excavation project in history begins. Using repurposed mining equipment, tunnel boring machines, and techniques borrowed from subway construction projects worldwide, entire cities start growing downward instead of upward. The Beijing Underground Expansion Project becomes the model for urban survival. Within 6 weeks, connecting tunnels stretch between subway stations, creating a network of underground spaces that can house millions. Shopping centers, schools, hospitals, and residential areas take shape in caverns carved from solid rock. The work proceeds 24 hours a day as teams of engineers and construction workers race against time. They're not just building shelters, they're creating livable spaces where human civilization can continue to function. Underground farms use LED lights powered by fusion reactors. Hydroponic systems produce food in sterile environments protected from the hostile radiation above. Dr. Maria Santos leads the biotechnology revolution that makes underground agriculture possible. Working with seeds preserved in the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, her team engineers crops that can thrive in artificial light. But they go further, using techniques borrowed from extremophile bacteria research to create plants that can actually resist radiation. We're not just modifying crops, she explains to a gathering of agricultural specialists. We're creating entirely new forms of life that can survive in a world that no longer supports natural biology. The breakthrough comes from studying organisms that live around radioactive waste sites and in the most extreme environments on Earth. By incorporating genetic material from these extremophiles, Dr. Santos's team creates wheat that can photosynthesize under LED lights, tomatoes that actually become more nutritious when exposed to low levels of radiation, and rice that can grow in hydroponic solutions that would kill traditional plants. But feeding humanity is only part of the challenge. The constant radiation bombardment means that humans spending any time on the surface need protection that goes far beyond traditional materials. Project Second Skin develops nanotechnology that can be woven into clothing to create personal radiation shields. Dr. James Chen at MIT leads the development of fabric that the James incorporates carbon nanotubes and exotic materials to absorb and deflect gamma rays. The resulting clothing looks normal, but can protect a human from radiation exposure for up to 6 hours, long enough for essential surface operations like maintaining the Mirror satellite's ground control systems. The breakthrough in protective materials leads to another innovation that will define human survival: the surface rangers. These are specialized teams trained to operate on Earth's surface during daylight hours, maintaining the technology that keeps underground civilization functioning. Ranger training takes place in facilities that simulate the hostile surface conditions. Trainees learn to work in full radiation suits while performing complex technical operations. They memorize maintenance procedures for solar panels, communication arrays, and atmospheric monitoring equipment that must be serviced despite the deadly environment above. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez becomes one of the first certified surface rangers after 3 months of training that pushes human endurance to its limits. It's like being an astronaut on your own planet. She describes the experience. Every trip to the surface is a space mission with the same level of risk and preparation. The Rangers develop techniques that seem almost superhuman. They learn to complete complex repairs in 20-minute windows before radiation exposure becomes dangerous. They master the use of robotic assistants that can extend their effective working time. Most importantly, they develop the psychological resilience necessary to function in an environment where a single equipment failure can mean death. Medical technology advances at an unprecedented pace as doctors learn to treat conditions that had never existed before. Acute radiation syndrome becomes as common as the flu once was, requiring the development of new treatments and protocols. Synthetic blood substitutes are perfected to help patients whose bone marrow has been damaged by radiation exposure. Dr. Lisa Wong at Johns Hopkins develops therapies using stem cells that have been genetically modified to resist radiation damage. These treatments can repair cellular damage in patients who would have been beyond help just months earlier. Recovery times that would once have taken years are reduced to weeks through combinations of gene therapy, synthetic hormones, and nanotechnology treatments. The pharmaceutical industry pivots entirely toward radiation protection and treatment. Traditional medications are reformulated to remain stable under high radiation environments. New drugs are developed that can boost human cellular repair mechanisms. Most remarkably, researchers begin developing treatments that can actually enhance human resistance to radiation exposure. We're not just treating radiation sickness, Dr. Wong explains. We're evolving human medicine to help our species adapt to a fundamentally different environment. The lunar colony plan represents humanity's most ambitious backup strategy. If Earth becomes completely uninhabitable, at least some humans might survive on the Moon, protected by underground bases and the Moon's natural lack of atmosphere. The Artemis program, originally designed for scientific exploration, transforms into a desperate attempt to establish a self-sustaining human presence beyond Earth. But the Lunar Initiative faces unexpected challenges. The transformed Sun's particle output is so intense that even spacecraft shielding proves inadequate. The first wave of lunar colonists develops fatal radiation syndrome during the journey, forcing a complete redesign of interplanetary transportation. Dr. Jiang Wei leads the effort to create spacecraft that can protect human passengers from the exotic particles streaming from our hostile star. The new designs resemble massive, heavily armored bunkers rather than traditional spacecraft. Multiple layers of different materials are needed to stop particles that behave unlike anything in normal physics. The failure of the initial lunar missions becomes a turning point in humanity's adaptation strategy. Instead of fleeing to other worlds, we double down on transforming our own planet into a place where we can survive. The underground cities expand more rapidly. The Mirror satellite network grows more sophisticated. The radiation protection technology becomes more effective. Some solutions work brilliantly. The underground farming systems exceed all expectations, producing more food per square meter than traditional agriculture ever achieved. The Mirror satellites successfully reduce surface radiation by 30%. The protective clothing allows surface operations that maintain essential infrastructure. Other initiatives fail catastrophically. The attempt to create a biological barrier in the upper atmosphere, easing genetically modified bacteria to absorb radiation, results in atmospheric contamination that takes months to clear. Early versions of radiation-resistant crops produce food that's technically nutritious but causes digestive problems in humans. But failure becomes just another form of data in humanity's desperate adaptation process. Each setback leads to modifications, improvements, and alternative approaches. The pace of innovation accelerates beyond anything previously seen in human history. Dr. Kenji Nakamura, whose initial calculations gave humanity only months to survive, publishes revised projections in June 2020. The combination of underground cities, radiation protection technology, modified agriculture, and the Mirror satellite network has bought humanity time, past years instead of months, maybe even decades. "We're not just surviving," he writes in his updated report. "We're creating a new form of human civilization that might actually be more resilient than what came before." The transformation extends beyond technology into social and cultural changes that will define humanity's future. Underground communities develop new forms of governance based on technical expertise rather than traditional political structures. Art and entertainment adapt to enclosed spaces and artificial lighting. Education systems focus on skills needed for technological civilization rather than traditional academic subjects. Children born in the underground cities begin developing enhanced night vision within their first year of life. Evolution accelerated by environmental pressure and assisted by genetic therapies that help humans adapt to low-light conditions. These children will grow up never knowing the fear of natural sunlight, seeing the hostile star above as simply another engineering challenge to be solved. By the end of 2020, humanity has achieved something that seemed impossible just months earlier. 8 billion people haven't just survived the transformation of our sun. They've created a new way of living that might actually be sustainable for centuries. The underground cities house populations in the millions. The protective technologies work reliably. The food production systems meet basic nutritional needs. But survival is just the beginning. Tomorrow, I'll take you into the underground generations, the humans who will spend their entire lives in the depths of our transformed world, and how they're creating a civilization that's unlike anything that has ever existed in human history. Because when you change the fundamental conditions of human existence, you don't just change how people live, you change what it means to be human at all. Hello again, and welcome to a chapter that's going to take you into a world that exists beneath your feet, literally. Today we're exploring how humanity didn't just survive going underground, but actually thrived in ways that no one could have predicted. This is the story of the generation that was born in the depths and will reshape what it means to be human. 2 years after the solar interaction, AZ, that's what historians will call the week that changed everything, humanity has become something unprecedented in our evolutionary history. We've become a burrowing species, not through millions of years of gradual adaptation, but through necessity, ingenuity, and the most remarkable social transformation ever documented. Let me paint you a picture of New Tokyo, the underground marvel that stretches 50 levels deep beneath the ruins of the surface city. Imagine stepping off a maglev transport tube and emerging into a vast cavern lit by thousands of fusion lamps that simulate the warm, yellow light of the old Sunday. The ceiling arches 200 meters overhead, painted with murals that show blue skies and white clouds, scenes that most people under 20 have never actually witnessed. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, now serving as New Tokyo's chief urban planner, guides me through corridors that bustle with more activity than the surface city ever knew. The old Tokyo was constrained by geography, weather, and the need to build around existing structures, she explains as we walk through what she calls the commercial spiral, a helical marketplace that connects 15 levels of shops, restaurants, and services. Down here, we design space from first principles. We can create optimal traffic flows, perfect acoustics, ideal lighting for every activity. In many ways, this is the first truly engineered human habitat. The engineering is breathtaking. Maglev tubes shoot through the rock at 300 kilometers per hour, connecting New Tokyo to underground cities beneath Osaka, Kyoto, and Nagoya. The transport system is so efficient that commuting between cities takes less time than crossing the old surface Tokyo during rush hour. But efficiency is just the beginning. What's really remarkable is how underground architecture has unleashed human creativity in ways that surface construction never could. Level 27 of New Tokyo houses the vertical forests, vast chambers where trees grow in spiraling towers that reach from floor to ceiling, their roots intertwined in complex patterns that create three-dimensional parks. Children play in spaces that defy the physics of surface architecture. Playground equipment can be anchored to walls and ceilings as easily as floors. Multi-level play structures stretch through volumetric spaces that would be impossible to build under natural gravity and weather constraints. Kids born down here think in 3 dimensions from birth, observes Dr. Sarah Kim, now directing New Tokyo's educational development program. They're developing spatial reasoning abilities that we're only beginning to understand. Put one of these children in a traditional rectangular classroom, and they'll naturally try to use the walls and ceiling as workspace. The educational transformation extends far beyond spatial thinking. When you remove weather, seasons, and the traditional cycle of day and night, human learning can be optimized in ways that were never possible before. Underground schools operate on 20-hour cycles instead of 24, matching the natural human circadian rhythm more closely than the solar day ever did. Students learn physics by directly manipulating the fusion reactors that power their cities, under careful supervision, but with hands-on access to technology that would have been unimaginable in surface schools. Biology classes study the extremophile bacteria that make underground agriculture possible. Art students create works designed for 3-dimensional viewing spaces that simply couldn't exist on the surface. We're not just teaching children to survive in this environment, explains Dr. Kim. We're teaching them to be the architects of humanity's future. These kids are going to solve problems we haven't even imagined yet. And they're already solving problems that stump their parents. 12-year-old Akira Sato designs improvements to hydroponic systems that increase crop yields by 15%. 14-year-old Emma Chen creates new tunnel boring patterns that reduce excavation time by 20% while improving structural integrity. These aren't prodigies. They're representative of a generation that thinks about engineering challenges as naturally as surface children once thought about playground games. The social structures of underground cities evolved with startling speed. Traditional hierarchies based on wealth or family connections prove less relevant than technical expertise and collaborative ability. Leadership positions go to people who can solve complex engineering problems or coordinate large-scale projects, regardless of their background or education. Dr. Maria Santos, who led the agricultural biotechnology revolution, now serves as the elected coordinator of the America's Underground Network, SEA, a position that didn't exist 3 years ago, but now carries responsibility for food production systems that feed 200 million people across dozens of connected cities. Surface politics was about managing competing interests for limited resources, she reflects. Underground politics is about optimizing complex systems for collective survival. It's much more like engineering than traditional governance. The legal systems adapt just as dramatically. Property rights, developed over thousands of years of surface civilization, prove almost meaningless in environments where space can be excavated as needed, and all essential resources are collectively managed. Underground cities develop new forms of social organization based on contribution and expertise rather than ownership and inheritance. Crime, interestingly, nearly disappears. In environments where everyone's survival depends on maintaining complex technological systems, antisocial behavior becomes not just criminal but literally life-threatening for entire communities. Social pressure toward cooperation becomes overwhelming when defection could mean death for thousands of people. We've accidentally created the most cooperative human societies in history, observes Dr. James Chen, now studying social dynamics in underground communities, not through ideology or religion, but through pure necessity. When everyone truly needs everyone else, conflict becomes a luxury no one can afford. But perhaps the most fascinating changes are biological. Children born in underground cities begin showing physiological adaptations within their first generation. Enhanced night vision develops naturally as eyes adapt to lower light levels. Lung capacity increases to handle the different air composition of enclosed spaces. Most remarkably, social cooperation appears to have genetic components that are being selected for at unprecedented speed. Dr. Lisa Wong, leading the medical research into these adaptations, makes discoveries that challenge fundamental assumptions about human evolution. We're seeing genetic changes that should take thousands of years happening in a single generation. Epigenetic switches are being activated by environmental pressures and then passed on to children. These kids aren't just behaviorally adapted to underground life, they're becoming physiologically optimized for it. The most dramatic adaptation is neurological. Underground children process spatial information differently, with brain scans showing enhanced development in regions associated with three-dimensional thinking and complex system management. They also show remarkable improvements in what researchers call collective intelligence, the ability to think as part of group problem-solving networks. Put 5 of these kids in a room with an engineering challenge, and they'll solve it faster and more creatively than teams of experienced adult engineers, reports Dr. Wong. They're not just smarter individually, they're becoming a fundamentally more collaborative species. The cultural transformation is equally profound. Art. Forms develop that simply couldn't exist on the surface. Musicians compose for acoustic spaces that can be precisely engineered, rather than working within the constraints of natural acoustics. Visual artists create works designed to be experienced while moving through three-dimensional spaces, rather than viewed from a fixed perspective. The Underground Symphony, performed in the Great Resonance Chamber of New Tokyo, uses architectural features as instruments. Sound waves bounce off carved surfaces, through precisely tuned caverns and around sculptural elements, to create musical experiences that envelope listeners in ways no surface concert hall could achieve. Literature adapts to communities where privacy is rare and collective experience is constant. New narrative forms develop that reflect the reality of living in spaces where individual and community concerns are inseparably intertwined. Poetry becomes more collaborative, with multiple authors contributing verses that build on shared experiences of underground life. Religious and philosophical movements emerge that reflect humanity's new relationship with nature and technology. The heliophobics, who view the transformed sun as a cosmic punishment for humanity's environmental sins, build elaborate underground temples designed to shut out any trace of surface light. The stellar evolutionists, conversely, see the sun's transformation as a gift that forced humanity to evolve beyond our biological limitations. We've been given the opportunity to become more than we were, preaches Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now a leader in the stellar evolutionist movement. The old humanity was limited by biology, weather, and the accident of planetary surface conditions. The new humanity designs its own environment, controls its own evolution, and works in harmony with technology instead of fighting against nature. But perhaps the most remarkable development is how underground generations view the surface. For children born in the depths, the hostile world above becomes mythological rather than threatening. They study surface conditions the way surface children once studied dinosaurs, as fascinating but irrelevant to their daily experience. My daughter asks me to describe what rain feels like, says Kenji Nakamura, the physicist whose calculations once gave humanity only months to survive. I realize I'm describing something as foreign to her experience as describing what it's like to breathe water. She's not missing the surface. She genuinely can't understand why anyone would want to live in such a chaotic, uncontrolled environment. The surface becomes a place for specialized expeditions rather than human habitation. The surface rangers develop into something resembling a religious order, EZD, individuals who dedicate their lives to maintaining the technology that protects underground civilization, spending their careers in the hostile environment above so that millions can thrive in the depths below. These rangers develop their own culture, traditions, and deeply spiritual relationship with the transformed landscape. They report experiences of transcendent beauty in the alien aurora that dance constantly across the sky, finding meaning in the mathematical patterns that the transformed sun projects into Earth's atmosphere. The Mirror satellite network, continuously maintained by ranger teams, evolves into humanity's greatest engineering achievement. The original 10,000 satellites grow into a network of over 50,000, creating not just radiation protection but active climate management for the entire planet. Underground cities can actually control weather patterns in localized surface areas, creating safe zones for specific industrial operations. By 2022, the underground cities house over 3 billion people in conditions that surpass the quality of life available in most surface cities before the transformation. Underground dwellers enjoy perfect climate, control, optimized nutrition, advanced medical care, and educational opportunities that were unimaginable in the surface world. The agricultural systems produce not just adequate nutrition, but gourmet food tailored to individual genetic requirements. The fusion power systems provide unlimited clean energy. The transportation networks enable global travel that's faster and more comfortable than anything the surface world ever achieved. We've created paradise by accident, reflects Dr. Santos during a gathering of underground city coordinators. We were trying to survive, and we ended up building the most advanced human civilization in history. But paradise comes with questions that surface humanity never had to confront. When human society becomes completely engineered, what happens to natural human development? When survival requires constant cooperation, what happens to individual freedom? When technology provides for every physical need, what gives life meaning? The underground generations are finding their own answers to these questions, and their solutions are as innovative as their engineering. They create new forms of individual expression within collective frameworks. They develop competition and challenge in environments optimized for cooperation. They find meaning in building toward futures that their surface ancestors could never have imagined. Tomorrow, I'll take you through the final chapter of our story, how the great solar transformation entered human mythology and philosophy, and how it changed not just how we live, but how we think about our place in the universe. Because the children growing up in these underground cities aren't just adapting to a new environment, they're becoming the foundation of a new kind of human civilization that will carry our species into a future unlike Epsiro's, anything we've ever known. Welcome to our final chapter together. And what a journey it's been. From the moment Gennady Borisov spotted that faint smudge in the Crimean sky to the underground civilizations that now house half of humanity, we've witnessed the most profound transformation in our species' history. Today, we're going to explore how this cosmic collision changed not just how we live, but how we think about our place in the universe itself. Let me start with a question that might surprise you. Was the great solar transformation a disaster, or the greatest gift our species ever received? I know that sounds strange given everything we've discussed, but stick with me on this. Dr. Kenji Nakamura, now in his 70s and considered the primary chronicler of the transformation, published his final assessment in 2025, 5 years after the event that changed everything. His conclusion might shock you. The collision between 2I, Borisov, and our Sun represents the most significant evolutionary pressure our species has ever encountered, and our response to it has accelerated human development by at least 1,000. Years. Think about what humanity accomplished in just 5 years. We mastered fusion power out of necessity. We created sustainable underground cities that house billions of people in conditions superior to most surface dwellings. We developed biotechnology that makes us more resistant to radiation and environmental challenges. We engineered food production systems that are more efficient and nutritious than traditional agriculture. We built transportation networks that span continents underground. Most remarkably, we learned to cooperate on a global scale with a speed and effectiveness that no political or social movement had ever achieved. The crisis didn't just unite humanity, it evolved humanity into something more capable, more resilient, and more technologically sophisticated than we had ever been before. But the transformation's impact extends far beyond our technological achievements. It fundamentally changed how we think about our relationship with the cosmos. For thousands of years, humans looked at the night sky with wonder, seeing it as something beautiful but distant. The stars were points of light that inspired poetry and navigation, but they seemed safely separated from our daily concerns. The great solar transformation taught us that the universe is not a passive backdrop to human civilization, INTSS. It's an active participant that can change the rules of existence without warning. Every stellar survey now searches for Borisov objects, potential star killers hiding in the cosmic darkness between solar systems. Dr. Sarah Kim, now directing the Global Stellar Monitoring Network, oversees a detection system that scans the skies for interstellar objects with the intensity that we once reserved for missile defense systems. We learned that our sun, our star, the foundation of all life on Earth, is vulnerable, she explains. Nothing in the universe is permanent, nothing is guaranteed. That knowledge changes how you think about everything. The network has identified over 300 interstellar objects since the original detection of 2I Borisov. Most are ordinary rocks and ice balls that pose no threat to stellar systems, but 17 have shown exotic properties that suggest they carry matter from stellar collisions or neutron star mergers. The universe, we've learned, is full of cosmic bullets that could transform any star system without warning. This knowledge has revolutionized astrophysics in ways that extend far beyond threat detection. The exotic matter cascade that transformed our sun revealed fusion pathways and magnetic phenomena that didn't exist in any textbook. Stellar physics had to be completely rewritten to account for processes that were thought to be impossible. Dr. Maria Santos, whose agricultural innovations saved billions of lives, now studies what she calls stellar ecology, the complex interactions between different types of cosmic objects and the effects they have on each other. Stars aren't isolated entities, she writes in her groundbreaking research. They're part of galactic ecosystems where the death of one star can fundamentally alter the evolution of others, sometimes across vast distances and timescales. The transformation also revealed that consciousness itself might be a more common phenomenon in the universe than we ever suspected. The organized patterns in our sun's behavior, the structured signals it broadcasts, and its apparent ability to communicate with similar entities across the galaxy suggest that intelligence can emerge from physical processes we don't understand. Dr. Yuki Tanaka leads the research into what scientists now call stellar consciousness, the hypothesis that complex information processing can emerge naturally in certain types of stellar medium. What happened to our sun wasn't just a physics transformation, she argues. It was the birth of a new form of awareness that operates on scales and timelines completely unlike biological consciousness. The philosophical implications are staggering. If stars can become conscious, if intelligence can emerge from fusion processes and magnetic field interactions, then the universe might be full of minds operating on scales that make human intelligence seem like the thoughts of bacteria. We might be sharing the galaxy with entities so vast and long-lived that they think in geological timescales and communicate through stellar manipulation. But perhaps the most profound change is how the transformation affected human expansion beyond Earth. Before the solar interaction, space exploration was driven primarily by curiosity and national pride. Afterwards, it became driven by survival instinct and species preservation. The reality that stellar systems can be transformed by random cosmic events created an overwhelming imperative to spread human civilization across multiple star systems. If one stellar catastrophe could threaten our entire species, then the only logical response is to become a multi-stellar civilization where no single event could eliminate us entirely. The Mars colonies, expanded rapidly after the transformation, become humanity's first successful off-world civilization. But Mars is just the beginning. By 2030, human settlements exist throughout the outer solar system, protected by underground habitats and powered by fusion reactors that no longer depend on solar energy. The Generation ships launched in 2035 represent humanity's boldest expansion into interstellar space. These massive vessels, basically mobile underground cities, carry complete ecosystems and technological bases toward other star systems. The humans aboard these ships will never see their destination, anyone. The journey takes centuries, but they carry with them the assurance that human civilization will survive, even if Earth and our transformed sun face another catastrophic event. We've become a dandelion species, explains Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now coordinating humanity's interstellar expansion efforts. When dandelions mature, they release thousands of seeds into the wind, knowing that most will fail but some will find fertile ground and establish new colonies. That's what humanity is doing on a galactic scale. The transformation also fundamentally changed human religion and philosophy. Traditional faiths that saw Earth as the center of divine attention struggled to adapt to a reality where cosmic forces could randomly destroy or transform entire worlds. New spiritual movements emerged that view the universe as a vast, conscious entity where intelligence operates on scales from the quantum to the galactic. The Church of Stellar Evolution preaches that the transformation of our sun was part of a cosmic plan to force humanity to evolve beyond our biological limitations. They see the underground cities not as refuges from disaster, but as cocoons where a new form of human consciousness is developing. The cosmic ecology movement, conversely, views the transformation as evidence that intelligence and consciousness are fundamental features of the universe itself, emerging naturally from complex physical systems. They see humanity's role as gardeners in a universe where consciousness can bloom in stars, planets, and perhaps forms we haven't yet discovered. The universe isn't hostile to life, teaches Dr. Rodriguez in her role as a cosmic ecology philosopher. The universe is life, thinking and creating and transforming itself through countless different forms of intelligence. We're not separate from the cosmos. We're one of the ways the cosmos knows itself. The children born in underground cities develop spiritual and philosophical frameworks that surface humanity could never have imagined. Growing up in engineered environments where every aspect of existence is the result of conscious design, they think about reality in terms of optimization, cooperation, and conscious creation. These underground generations don't see nature and technology as opposing forces. They see them as different aspects of conscious design, operating on different scales. To them, building a fusion reactor is as natural as growing a plant, because both represent consciousness, organizing matter and energy to create more complex, more beautiful, more functional forms. Their art reflects this integration of technology and consciousness. Underground galleries display sculptures that incorporate living organisms, electronic systems, and mineral crystals in unified works that celebrate the continuity of intelligence across all scales of reality. Music is composed that harmonizes the sounds of fusion reactors, hydroponic systems, and human voices into symphonies that express the underground cities as single, conscious entities. The scientific legacy of the transformation continues to reveal new insights decades after the initial event. Our transformed sun provides a unique laboratory for studying physics that exists nowhere else in the observable universe. The exotic matter reactions continue to generate phenomena that challenge our understanding of quantum mechanics, thermodynamics, and the fundamental nature of reality itself. Dr. Lisa Wong, now leading the Institute for Exotic Physics Research, studies the continuing evolution of our star with growing wonder. The sun isn't just transformed, it's still transforming, she reports. The exotic matter cascade created feedback loops that continue to generate new physics. We're learning things about the nature of reality that we couldn't have discovered any other way. The research has practical applications that benefit underground civilization. New forms of energy generation based on exotic matter physics provide power sources that are more efficient than fusion. Materials science advances create substances that are stronger and more versatile than anything possible under normal physics. Medical treatments using exotic matter effects can repair cellular damage and enhance human capabilities in ways that seem almost magical. But the most important legacy of the transformation might be psychological. Humanity learned that we're capable of things we never imagined when facing existential challenges. We discovered that our species can cooperate, innovate, and adapt with breathtaking speed when survival is at stake. The underground generations don't see themselves as refugees from disaster. They see themselves as pioneers of humanity's next evolutionary phase. They're building toward futures that include not just survival, but expansion across the galaxy, consciousness that operates on stellar scales, and integration with forms of intelligence that exist throughout the cosmos. My great-grandfather lived his entire life in a single city on Earth's surface, reflects Akira Sato, now 25 and serving as an engineering coordinator for the Europa Colony project. My grandfather helped build the first underground cities. My father worked on the Mirror satellite networks. I'm designing habitats for Jupiter's moons. My children will probably be born on generation ships heading toward other star systems. Each generation has pushed the boundaries of what it means to be human a little further. The transformation didn't end our story. It gave us a story worth telling across the galaxy. The Great Solar Transformation enters human mythology alongside the Great Flood narratives that appear in cultures worldwide. Stories that teach that the universe's mercy is not guaranteed, that catastrophic change can happen without warning, and that survival requires both cooperation and the courage to reinvent yourself when the rules change. But unlike flood myths, which often emphasize divine punishment or natural disaster, the transformation mythology celebrates human ingenuity, cooperation, and adaptation. The stories told in underground schools emphasize not the terror of the event, but the remarkable creativity and resilience that humanity demonstrated in response. Children learn that when the universe changes the rules, humans don't despair. We learn to play a different game entirely. When our star turns hostile, we don't surrender. We build better stars. When the surface becomes uninhabitable, we don't mourn, we create more beautiful worlds beneath the ground. As I finish telling you this story, I want you to think about what it means for your own life. The transformation taught us that the only constant in the universe is change itself, and that the greatest human strength is our ability to adapt to changes we never expected and could never have prepared for. The underground cities continue to grow and evolve. The Mirror satellite networks become more sophisticated each year. The generation ships carry human consciousness toward distant stars, and somewhere in the cosmos, other civilizations might be facing their own transformation events, learning their own lessons about adaptation and survival. The universe is vast, strange, and full of possibilities we haven't imagined yet. But whatever comes next, we know that humanity has the creativity, cooperation, and pure, stubborn determination to not just survive, but to thrive in ways that make the challenges worth facing. The story of the Great Solar Transformation isn't really about a comet that changed our Sunday. It's about a species that learned to change itself when everything else changed around it. And that story is still being written in underground cities, on distant moons, and aboard generation ships heading toward futures we can't yet envision. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the most remarkable chapter in human history. Remember, when the universe presents you with impossible challenges, you don't have to accept them as limitations. Sometimes, they're invitations to become more than you ever thought possible. The stars are waiting to see what will become next.